of sorrow, the first face of sorrow is the worldly face. It is a worldly face. It is the worldly sorrow. 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 10, Paul writes, "Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret. But worldly sorrow brings death." Sorrow or grieving are the results of mourning. And Paul contrasts two forms or two faces of sorrow here. Godly sorrow, which we will get to in a minute, and a worldly sorrow. Godly sorrow leads to salvation. Worldly sorrow brings death. Now, sorrow is sorrow. The difference is a matter of who it is affecting. It's a matter of who is in the mirror. And if a non-Christian worldly person is handling it, the result is death. If a non-Christian person is handling it in the flesh, the only way they know how, the result is death. The worldly grief or sorrow takes two forms. First of all, it is without hope. I've heard of the hope atheists attach to death. I've read some of the smartest people of our time who happen to be atheists and who have since passed, and their philosophical approach to loss, to death. Philosophically, they are good and fine, in their words, with dying and being integrated back into the earth biologically. They can come to a point where they accept that. I see very few deathbed confessions. Very few people are drug up to the very last day of their life and then say, "Hey, I'm afraid to die. I'm going to change." A long time before that, we tend to come to peace with where we think we will spend eternity. So death for non-believers pretty much is I go to sleep and I'm okay with that. They do not understand that we are eternal creatures. They do not understand, first of all, that it is not only in our heart, it is in our DNA. We do not just meld back into the dirt. We have a soul and a spirit that lives on. William Barclay, talking about the ancients and the ancient philosophers and how they handled death, and the non-Christians, how they dealt with it, he writes this. He says, "In the face of death, the pagan world stood in despair. They met with grim resignation and bleak hopelessness. One writer says, once a man dies, there is no resurrection. Another says, there is hope for those who are alive, but those who have died are without hope. Another says, when once our brief light sets, there is one perpetual dark through which we must sleep." On their tombstones, grim epitaphs were carved. One said, "I was not, I became, I am not, I care not." He says one of the most pathetic papyrus letters that has come down to us from the ancients says, "When I heard of your grief, I was sorry, and I wept over the departed one as I wept over Didymus. And for all things whatsoever were befitting, I did, and all mine, Epaphroditus and others, I thought of, who had gone before, but nonetheless, against such things one can do nothing. Therefore, comfort one another."